that this particular profile is going to be a combination.
To tragedy, there is a kind of romance. And so it would have been appealing.
In 1991, a muddy, unmarked pit in a remote Siberian forest gave up its secret. 9 skeletons, tangled, burned, and buried in haste. They were believed to be Russia's last royal family, the Romanovs.
The whole fabric of this story is woven into hundreds and hundreds of years.
The DNA can't tell us exactly.
For 73 years, they had been ghosts of history. This discovery was meant to bring closure. Instead, it unearthed a mystery darker than anyone imagined. Because 2 children were missing. And inside those bones, hidden in the strands of ancient DNA, lay a clue to a far more disturbing story. The discovery. The Soviet Union was collapsing, and with it, the silence of an empire. In a boggy forest outside Yekaterinburg, a geologist named Alexander Avdonin followed a secret map, a report once written by one of the Romanovs' executioners. What he found changed everything. Beneath a thin layer of soil was a pit, and inside, a tangled mass of bones, soaked with acid and scarred by fire. 9 bodies lay there. Forensic teams began the delicate work of reconstruction. Among the dead, they found an adult male and female, and 3 young women, alongside 4 faithful servants. The evidence pointed unmistakably toward Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and 3 of their daughters, Olga, Tatiana, and either Maria or Anastasia. But something was wrong. Nicholas and Alexandra had 5 children. The bodies of Alexei, the young heir, and 1 daughter were missing. That single detail reignited the greatest royal mystery of the 20th century, the legend that one of the Romanovs had survived. The DNA revolution. In the 1990s, DNA forensics was still in its infancy. Scientists in Russia, Britain, and the United States joined forces to uncover the truth hidden in the bones. They focused on mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed directly from mother to child. To confirm the identity of the Tsarina, they needed a living relative from her maternal line. They found one, Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, Tsarina's grandnephew. His blood sample produced a perfect match. The mitochondrial DNA from the female skeletons was identical to his. Tsarina and 3 daughters had been found beyond any doubt. But identifying Nicholas was more complex. He carried a rare genetic condition called heteroplasmy, 2 types of mitochondrial DNA within one person, something few understood at the time. Only when scientists exhumed the remains of Nicholas's brother, Grand Duke George, did the picture become clear. The genetic match was absolute. These were the Romanovs. Yet the question remained, where were the other 2 children?
The fall of a dynasty. To understand the mystery of their disappearance, you have to understand the empire that created it. The Romanov dynasty ruled Russia for over 3 centuries, longer than the United States has existed. They lived in gilded palaces, symbols of unimaginable wealth and power. But by the early 20th century, cracks were showing. Tsar Nicholas II was a family man, kind but indecisive. The empire he ruled was crumbling under the weight of war and hunger. World War I devastated Russia. Millions died. The people starved while the royal court seemed detached from reality. The Tsarina, Alexandra, of German descent, was despised by many, who saw her as an enemy sympathizer. Her closeness with the mystic Grigory Rasputin only deepened public outrage and fueled rumors of corruption. By 1917, revolution erupted. The Tsar was forced to abdicate, ending 300 years of rule overnight. The once mighty royal family was reduced to prisoners, first in Tobolsk and later in a fortified mansion in Yekaterinburg, the Ipatiev House, ominously renamed the House of Special Purpose. The walls were painted over, windows sealed. Their guards watched their every move. They lived under constant threat, unaware that their fate was already sealed. The execution. In the early hours of July 17, 1918, a false alarm sounded. The family was told they were being moved for safety. They dressed quietly. Nicholas carried his fragile son Alexei in his arms. The family descended into the basement. Moments later, armed men entered the room. Commander Yakov Yurovsky read a short decree. "The Euro-Soviet has sentenced you to death." Gunfire erupted. The small cellar filled with smoke, screams, and chaos. The bullets ricocheted off the walls. The daughters, their corsets lined with jewels, were briefly shielded. But the horror continued until all lay still. Within minutes, the dynasty was gone, an empire's light extinguished in the dark. The cover-up. The killers had another problem: what to do with the bodies. They needed to erase every trace. The corpses were stripped, doused in acid, and dumped into a mine shaft called the Four Brothers. But it failed. The shaft was too shallow. Fearful the advancing White Army would discover the site, Yurovsky ordered the bodies moved again. In a frenzy, the remains were reburied in 2 different places, 9 in one pit, and 2 burned and buried separately. That desperate decision, meant to hide the crime, would later give birth to the myth of Anastasia's survival. The Lost Princess. In 1920, a young woman was pulled from a Berlin canal after an attempted suicide. She refused to give her name. Eventually, she whispered a claim that stunned the world. "I am Grand Duchess Anastasia." She became known as Anna Anderson, and her story ignited a worldwide obsession. Some believed her. Her resemblance, her mannerisms, her knowledge of palace life, uncanny. Others were convinced she was an impostor, a Polish factory worker named Franciszka Sząskowska. Her decades-long legal battle to be recognized as Anastasia made her both a symbol of hope and a global mystery. Movies, plays, and books turned her legend into a fairy tale. And as long as 2 Romanov children were missing, the myth could never fully die. The Second Grave. For nearly 90 years, the puzzle remained incomplete. Then, in 2007, a group of local archaeologists returned to the forest near Yekaterinburg. They believed Yurovsky's old account still hid clues. Just 230 feet from the first grave, they found a small pit filled with burned bone fragments, 44 pieces in total. Charred, shattered, soaked in acid. The evidence matched the executioner's reports precisely. The missing children had been found. DNA tests in the world's top laboratories confirmed it beyond doubt. The mitochondrial DNA matched the Tsarina. The nuclear DNA matched both Nicholas and Alexandra. The final mystery was over. All 11 victims, the Tsar, the Tsarina, their 5 children, and 4 loyal servants, were accounted for. The legend and the lesson. The Romanovs are gone, but their story endures. A haunting reminder of how myth can outlive truth. For decades, the world needed to believe that innocence had survived the violence of history. Perhaps we wanted the fairy tale, not the facts. Because sometimes it's easier to believe in the legend of a lost princess than to face the bones that tell the real story. Implications of DNA from the Romanov family's remains just revealed a truth too dark for history to handle. The discovery and DNA confirmation of the Romanov family's remains was more than the solving of a historical mystery. It was the unmasking of a century-old lie buried beneath the ruins of an empire. For decades, the Soviet state carefully controlled the narrative surrounding the Romanovs, erasing evidence, silencing witnesses, and rewriting history to justify a revolution built on blood. When DNA technology finally exposed the truth that all the Romanovs had indeed been murdered and hidden, it shattered one of the last illusions of the Soviet legacy. The implications reach far beyond the bones themselves. First, it forces modern Russia to confront the uncomfortable moral origins of its modern identity. The murder of the Tsar, Tsarina, their children and loyal servants wasn't just an act of political revenge, it was a symbolic execution of Russia's soul. Their remains tell a story of a nation that replaced divine monarchy with godless ideology, trading one form of absolute power for another. The DNA results stripped away propaganda and made the brutality undeniable. Second, the Romanov findings challenge how we handle truth versus myth. For nearly a century, millions preferred the fantasy of Anastasia's survival to the horror of her death. That hope represented something deeper, humanity's refusal to accept that innocence could perish so completely. The forensic revelations shattered that dream, forcing the world to admit that even royal blood cannot escape the violence of history. It's a confrontation with human denial, our need to romanticize tragedy to make it bearable. Third, it raises spiritual and philosophical questions about legacy, sin, and redemption. The Romanovs, canonized by the Russian Orthodox Church as martyrs, now stand as symbols of faith amid political darkness. Their DNA not only confirmed their deaths, but, in a haunting way, resurrected their memory. A scientific revelation intertwined with spiritual consequence. The rediscovery of their remains compelled Russia to hold state funerals, prayers, and reburials, acts of repentance that the Soviet regime could never allow. Finally, the case underscores how science can pierce through centuries of deception. What ideology, censorship, and myth tried to conceal, DNA brought into the light. It proved that truth, though buried in acid and ashes, cannot stay hidden forever. The Romanov discovery was not just about solving a mystery, it was about humanity reclaiming its history from the shadows. In the end, the Romanov remains do more than reveal a family's fate. They expose the dark heart of revolution, the fragility of truth, and the eternal struggle between faith and power. Reminders that history always remembers, even when those in power try to forget.